worked with thousands of people, helping them build systems to learn faster and increase productivity. And regardless of age, location, or field of study, every single one of them makes at least one of these 5 huge mistakes.
Yeah, and some people make all 5 mistakes. So they spend the entire week learning, but not retaining anything.
We're going to talk about how to avoid these 5 mistakes. But despite what you might think, it's not just completely throwing away what you're doing. It's a simple switch you can do that's actually going to improve your learning instead.
So the first switch to think about is time versus tension.
I love comparing working out and building muscle to building up the muscle of learning. Tonal is basically a workout system where it helps you build muscle or gain some strength. I think LeBron James and Steph Curry are
they're like the endorsers of this.
Yeah. One of the things they emphasize so much is that it doesn't matter how much time you spend working out. What's more important is how much time under tension are you spending. Where there's high effort and high energy, that's where most of the muscle building in the real work happens.
If you're on a treadmill and you're just walking leisurely on the treadmill while scrolling on your phone versus someone who is just straight sprinting on the treadmill, but they only need to sprint for 30 seconds and then the other person can go for 30 minutes and not feel anything at all. So think about exactly what you're doing when you're learning something. How hard is your brain working?
Right, your brain is the muscle.
Are you looking for learning objectives? Are you actually opening curiosity loops and then completing them? When you're thinking in this way, your brain is actually burning a lot of calories. You're sitting there and you're trying to read and study and you're actually falling asleep. Then your brain is probably not burning that many calories. So yeah, the tension is not a physical tension. It is a mental strain type of tension.
It's supposed to give you a little bit of a headache. And so if you actually feel the tension, that's a good thing. You want to actually do more of that. To put that together, the first mistake here is to stop thinking about getting more time into study or to learn something and focus instead on how much tension can you get during that study session. But even if it is cognitively demanding while you're learning, that doesn't mean you've actually learned something. And that actually brings us to the next mistake here,
which is declarative versus procedural knowledge.
Right. So in our brain, there are actually 2 different pathways for learning. The declarative pathway is when we learn things like concepts, definitions, facts, things. But there's also another path called the procedural path. And this is the part of our brain that's focused on doing things, experiences. The mistake that a lot of learners make is they spend way too much time in declarative learning. They read the textbooks, they read the manuals, they watch all the videos, they binge through videos, right? So people buy courses and just binge the whole course, but they don't ever take any action. So if they don't take any action, they never activate the procedural pathways of the brain.
Because learning is a cycle, right? You have to do both declarative and procedural to kind of round it out and make sure that what you receive sticks.
It actually takes a lot longer for our brain to build the procedural pathway, those neural networks, than it does declarative. But very paradoxically, people spend the opposite amount in each one. They spend 3 hours in declarative, maybe an hour, maybe even less of an hour in the procedural, but you actually want to flip it. The rule that we tell all of our learners to use is something called the 1-2-3 rule. So for every 1 hour of declarative learning, you want to get at least 2 points of feedback. So ask for help or ask ChatGPT just to clarify what you've learned. And you also want to spend 3 hours practicing it. So that's the ratio, 1, 2, 3. So that's how you should think about splitting up your learning time versus doing time. But how should you think about just structuring your day for productivity overall? So the next mistake is not understanding the difference between focus and diffuse mode.
Focus is like shining a flashlight, and then diffuse is like having an overhead light. So the flashlight is more concentrated beams of light. So you can see right in front of you very, very clearly. And then the diffuse mode is an overhead light. So the light is not as concentrated, it's more dispersed. It lights up more of the room, but things are not as clear. Let's say we're both standing in this huge dark room, right? And I am trying to get to you. And I have a flashlight and I have, I guess, my phone with a home Apple app on it where I can hit the switch and I'll turn on the overhead light on and off. But I can't use both at the same time. That's how the brain works. The brain can't be hyper focused and then in diffuse mode at the same time. So I will use the overhead light to give me a sense of oh, you're in that general direction. But I don't want to use the overhead light while I'm walking because then I can't see things right in front of me. What if I trip over things on the floor? There's stuff all over the place, right? It's kind of like a game of Marco Polo, It's turn the overhead light on, I see you in the distance, I'll head in that direction, but turn it off so I can use the flashlight so that I can make sure I'm avoiding all the obstacles on the way. Yeah, and it's that back and forth of focus and diffuse. That is the fastest way to get to where you are. And in learning, you just replace getting to you with understanding the concept.
So that's why if you're struggling to learn something that's very complex, completely just step away for a while. You need to see the big picture, the diffuse mode, and give your brain a rest because it's been focusing too hard. It's going to burn itself out.
So an easy tip to implement this is actually something we did a lot in med school, was that we would study in groups. And so we would all go on to our own different focus mode and we would learn about the material. And then after a period, when you get a little bit exhausted, then you switch into diffuse mode. You just kind of hang out with your study buddies and you kind of discuss the topic. This is how I understand this. How do you understand that? But when we discuss together in our diffuse mode, then that's when the dots start to connect.
So all three of these mistakes so far have been centered around productivity, right? How do you manage your energy levels? How do you manage your brain power and cognitive effort? But the last two are actually focused on the learning itself. So the next big mistake is using linear thinking versus lateral thinking when learning a new complex topic. In video games, sometimes they have something called fog of war. So you can only see a little bit around you and it's all black outside. Or and you're trying to move across the map. And as you're moving, you hit a wall. They'll just try to hop over the wall, or they'll try to dig through the wall, or try to go under the wall because they see a linear path from point A to point B. Lateral thinking is, okay, what if I just walk around and find another path to get through? If you are learning something like physics, for example, and you get to a concept that is really challenging, a lot of students will just keep trying to reread the same passage, redo the same problems, and they keep getting stuck at that one part. So lateral thinking would be instead, okay, instead of trying to hammer this in again, can I make an analogy to something that I already know? Can I sidestep here to a similar concept?
I would go to a different resource, look up like a 2-minute YouTube video. Nowadays, I mean, you can use AI or ChatGPT, and you can even ask ChatGPT to explain it to you in like a bajillion different ways.
So knowing when to use linear versus lateral thinking, huge unlock for a lot of learners. But this last mistake, if it's corrected, has the potential to improve your retention of what you learned the longest. And that is understanding the difference between note taking and note making.
I do remember in grade school where our teachers would like yell at us if we're not writing things down. It's like when someone sees you like just sitting there listening and you're not writing anything down, it makes it look like you're not paying attention.
The problem with this habit that we get from school is that a lot of learners translate that same process of note taking when they self-study. So even when they're studying for exams at home or, learning something for their business or anything like that, they still follow the same steps of I'm reading this article or I'm reading this textbook and I'm just taking notes on the textbook. If you're gonna take notes on the textbook, you might as well just go back to the textbook. The notes are already there. So I think we're trained in school that note taking is for writing things down so I don't forget them, and I'm gonna ignore the learning part. So the simple switch here is to just start thinking of yourself not as a note taker, like someone who's just taking down things so you don't forget it, into becoming a note maker, where you are only writing things down if it comes from an understanding that you have. A really powerful way to implement note making is when you're learning something, just don't write anything down at all. Pay attention, try to understand and really grasp whatever the concepts are. And then after there is a natural pause, a natural breaking point, draw a picture of exactly what you think you just learned. Force your brain to create that tension, the cognitive process. And that way you'll really be able to tell, did you learn it or did you just passively consume something? Going from note taking to note making, it does so many things for your learning. Not only are you saving all that time of relearning because you're just gonna learn it right the first time, but also you're gonna have this visual note. We call it a tree note. And you have a very clear idea of what you've just consumed in your own words, which is probably the most important part. So think of it this way. A win would be if you can note and make and then not have to return to that original resource. That means you've actually learned it and you have something that should be faster to revisit than going back to the original source.
So of the 5 mistakes, I know we spent a little bit more time on the note taking versus note making, but honestly, it's a very deep topic and we can probably go on for hours about it. If you want to think about learning like going to the gym again, then note taking and writing, those are 2 exercises that's constantly having to improve on. So if you want to get better at these techniques, this is what we train every day in study quests. If you want to grow alongside other people who are getting better at these techniques, then consider joining.